Okay, today we're doing Act 2 of the Crucible. So, some background is this scene takes 8 days later at John Proctor's house. Okay, and this is kind of where things start to pick up. So, you'll see that people actually start getting arrested for being witches and things like that during this act over here. So, the act starts with Elizabeth, so that's obviously John's wife, singing to her children. So John comes into the house, he hears her singing, and there's something cooking, so he goes and tastes it, and he throws in some salt because he doesn't really like her cooking. Okay, so this kind of leads up to their relationship where we see that it is strained, and we will go into that now. So she asks about his day and dishes him up some food. She tells him that it's rabbits and how the rabbits basically like came into the house. And then she picked up the rabbit and decided to kill it and make stew for John. So John says it's well seasoned, which obviously we know it was not well seasoned because he put some salt in it. And Elizabeth is happy and she tells him that she took great care. So you can see by the words took great care that she really wants to make an impression on John. Like they're really trying to make things work between them, especially because the relationship is strained, and John kind of knows this, and he says to her that he means to please her. Then he says that she should pick some flowers for the house and that he will go out and pick them with her. So you can kind of see how they're trying desperately to kind of make things work again. But there is an underlying fear that Elizabeth does not hide, and that is that she's worried that he is going to cheat again because he said that he was going into Salem. So that's obviously their town, and obviously now John takes a little bit of offense. But yeah, so no, he didn't go into Salem, sorry. So she's worried that he's been cheating again, and he asks where Mary is. So remember, Mary is their servant, and they said that Mary actually went to Salem. So sorry, let me just correct that. Mary went into Salem. Now, this is very strange because Mary is obviously their servant, and Elizabeth forbade her to go to Salem. But Elizabeth could not stand up to her because Mary is now an official of the court. So now this is where things kind of start to pick up, because we know Mary as this very frightened girl in Act 1 when John walked into the room and she was not supposed to be where Betty and Abigail were. She like jumped into the air out of fright. So now the fact that she's disobeying them and going to court shows like a change in like authority, like she's almost got the upper hand over them. And then Elizabeth says that, oh no, so Mary comes in and she says that 14 people are now in jail. Okay, and the court will hang them. The court has the power to hang them, and they will only be hanged if they don't confess that they are a witch. So what they're also noticing is that if the girls, okay, so Mary hasn't come in, sorry guys, this is all over the place, I should have been more thorough in my notes. Okay, so Elizabeth tells John that there are 14 people in jail and that the court has the power to hang them, and they will be hanged if they don't confess for being witches. Okay, and if the girls scream and fall to the floor, they do go to jail. So what she's basically saying here is that if you and I are now standing, we're officials of the court, and say someone we don't like walks into the room, and we just decide, okay, we want this person to get arrested. So we decide we're going to fall onto the floor and scream and cry in pain so that it seems like this person that's just walked in is bewitching us. So that's basically what they've been doing. And just by doing that, these people are going to jail. So John says that is black mischief, and we must tell them that it is a fraud, or tell them that it is a fraud. So that's what Elizabeth said. She says you must tell them that it is a fraud, because obviously Abigail told John Proctor that they were just having a bit of fun, and then Betty took fright, and that it had nothing to do with witchcraft. So Elizabeth says, go tell Ezekiel about Abigail saying it wasn't witchcraft. So Ezekiel is now one of the court officials, so that's why they need to tell him. Now John is obviously hesitant because he can't prove that it happened, because him and Abigail were in a room alone. So now Elizabeth's obviously heard, she doesn't trust him, and then she says to him, if you weren't hurting Abigail, you would do it in a heartbeat. So she's basically calling him out, and she's saying, you don't really care about me, because if it were any other girl, you would do it because you know it's wrong. But now because it's Abigail, you don't want to do it because you're afraid of hurting her. And obviously, by saying that, she's kind of admitting, or like letting him know, or making him realize that he has a tenderness for Abigail still. And obviously, I mean, if you're someone's spouse, you wouldn't want them to have a soft spot for somebody else. Okay, so then Mary comes in, and she doesn't react to John's anger, because now he's very angry with her for going to court, which again is very interesting, because again she was very like she was a very skittish, I want to say, girl in Act 1. And this is very important. She comes in and she gives me Elizabeth a rag doll. Okay, so the reason why the rag doll has significance is got to do with witchcraft, obviously, and you will see why this whole witch trial is like such a fake, pathetic thing that kind of happens. And now what's interesting is when she gives Elizabeth this rag doll, she says, we must all love each other now. All love each other now. Goody Proctor. Okay. This is obviously ironic, because you'll see again at the end of this act, I don't really want to spoil it for you, but it's also ironic because they're busy sending people to prison, and that's not loving each other at all. So it's a very ironic thing to say, is to come home and say we must all love each other now, after you've just put people in jail today. So then she says that she will clean in the morning, and that 39 people are to hang now. So in a day, it jumped from 14 to 39 people who are now going to hang. And she says Goody Osborne will hang, and Sarah Good confessed to being in partnership with the devil. Okay, so Goody Osborne will hang, and then Sarah Good confessed. Okay, so she confessed that she's been in partnership with the devil, and then Proctor mentions that Sarah is a blabberer. Okay, so that means she talks a lot of nonsense. And then she says, no, she choked us all to death. She sent her spirit out. And then obviously Elizabeth says, what nonsense this is. Like, obviously they don't believe what Mary's trying to tell them. And then Mary says, she tried to kill me, Goody Proctor. And then Goody Proctor says, I never knew this before. And then she says, okay, so now one thing you need to know about Sarah Good is that she sleeps in ditches and that she's old and poor, right? And she once asked Mary for bread and cider, and then Mary turned her away and she mumbled. And then after that, she thought her guts would burst, right? So they obviously still think it's a bit silly, because, you know, you can just mumble. It doesn't mean you bewitching someone. So the judge asked Sarah Good what she says when she turns away and mumbles. And then Sarah says no, she says her commandments, right? Okay, so she says her commandments. And then the judge says to her, so then obviously John, Proctor, and Elizabeth first say, well, that's an upright answer. How can she be like told she's doing witchcraft if she's saying her commandments? And then Mary goes, well, that's just the thing. She can't recall them at all. And when they asked her to say them, obviously she couldn't recall them. And then John says, but you can't condemn her for that. And Mary goes, but she condemned herself. So again, Proctor says something very interesting. So I'm going to write this down for you. He says, but the proof, because obviously this is proof enough for the court, but it's actually not solid proof. So this obviously really bothers John because he is an upright man and he knows that this is a bunch of rubbish. And so he forbids her to attend court. And then she says she cannot do that. They do weighty work. So weighty work means like they're doing a very important job. Okay. Then they say that Goody Good is not going to get hanged just yet. She is pregnant. So Goody Good is Sarah Good. So they just put Goody in front because it means good wife. So she's pregnant and she's near 60. So Elizabeth and John don't believe her because how can a 60-year-old be pregnant? And then she says, no, it's true. They had someone look at her and she's pregnant. So then John wants to whip her. And again, she stands upright and she's not afraid. And she says, okay, I'm going to write this down because this has actually got some significance. So she says to him, the devil's loose in Salem. In Salem, Proctor. We must discover where he's hiding. Okay. So this is interesting because John's response is, I'll whip the devil out of you. So the reason why I say it's interesting and it's got significance is because Proctor obviously knows that this is such rubbish, and Mary knows it's rubbish too because she was part of the girls that were sitting around dancing in the forest and watching everything happen. And so she knows that there's no devil, that they were just having innocent fun and now they're throwing innocent people under the bus. So she's saying, oh, but the devil's loose in Salem, Proctor. We must discover where he's hiding. And Proctor is so clever because he says, I'll whip the devil out of you. And what's nice about him saying that is like he knows it's a bunch of rubbish. And so he's kind of saying to her, you guys are the devil. And he'll whip it out of her. So that's kind of interesting that he says that. It's significant, obviously, by saying, I'll whip the devil out of you, because it's the girls that are actually doing the most evil work with the hanging of innocent people. Okay, so then Mary turns around and says, I saved Elizabeth today. So Mary saved Elizabeth. And now this is obviously a shock to Elizabeth because she says she's accused. And then Mary goes, somewhat mentioned. So then they go, well, who accused me? And then Mary says, no, she is like bound by law. She cannot say who accused her. And now obviously this ends up in a little bit of a fight because now John's worried about his wife and Elizabeth's obviously worried about herself. And he tells Mary to go to bed. And so she says she's a woman now. John can't tell her what to do. And she kind of like carries on like that. And then he says to her, then sit up. So that means then stay awake. And she says, I wish to go to bed. So then John says to her, good night then. So that's obviously childish because he's telling her to go to bed. She's saying she doesn't want to do it. And then she turns around and says, no, I actually want to go to bed. So you can see that she is still childish. And the reason why this happening is important is because it proves that they're not mature. right? So if they're not mature, how can they send people to jail? Because they're still very childish in their nature. So it's kind of like a 5-year-old telling you that you're a witch and now you got to go to jail. Like, you wouldn't take it seriously, right? And yet the town is taking these childish children very seriously. So Elizabeth says to John, the noose is up. So a noose, you know those ropes where it's like tied at the end like that? That's a noose. So obviously to hang. So she says the noose is up, and they have kind of like a panicked conversation. John is a man of logic, and he's trying to like ease the situation a little bit, and he tells Elizabeth to be wise. So she says to him, like, you need to obviously go tell the court what happened. So he says, I'll go to Ezekiel and tell him that the girl said it was all sport. And Elizabeth says, no, you need to go to Abigail, right? Because Abigail is obviously the one who has accused Elizabeth. So he says, no, he doesn't really want to like do that. And she says, there's a promise made in any bed, spoken or not. Abigail thinks to take Elizabeth's place. Now John denies it, but he knows it's true. So Abigail seeks to take Elizabeth's place. Okay, so she basically says to him, go to Abigail and break the promise with Abigail. But before we move on, I want to mention, do you see how Abigail is using this for self-gain? Because we know Elizabeth's not a witch. She knows Elizabeth is not a witch. She obviously just wants to accuse Elizabeth of witchcraft so that Elizabeth can get hanged, and then Abigail can become John's new wife. So do you see how all of this is all about gaining from others, like throwing other people under the bus for self-gain. Okay, so then what's interesting is Mr. Hale arrives. So we know Mr. Hale is the I don't know. I can't find the word now, but he's the one who specializes in demonology. So he looks like he's like worn down, and he looks even a little bit guilty. And so they invite him in, and he mentions to them that Elizabeth's name was mentioned in court, and Rebecca has also been mentioned. And they say, but you cannot believe it. Elizabeth, is the most, not Elizabeth, sorry. Rebecca is the most upright person. How is she being accused? So they can't believe it, and they say to Hale that he cannot believe it, and he says he might. Which is actually kind of sad, because when he met Rebecca, he still said to her in Act 1, oh, you're the famous Rebecca, we've heard about your charities in wherever he was from. And so he knows that she's a good person, yet he'll stand by and watch her being accused of witchcraft because anything can happen. So he then says to the family that he notices that they've barely been in church during the Sabbath and that it's an issue. And then John Proctor says a minister should pray without golden sticks on his altar, golden candlesticks on his altar. Okay, so what's interesting about this, right, is Paris, who's the minister, is obviously very materialistic. Okay, materialistic. That's probably spelled wrong. I'm sorry. Okay, so he's very materialistic, and what's interesting is Hale dismisses this, right? Dismisses this thing of valuing things over God. And then he carries on. He says, you guys have 3 boys. Why are only 2 baptized? So John says they don't want Paris to touch him. And then he asks them to say their commandments. And Elizabeth says no, she knows all of her commandments. And then Hale notices that John is a bit hesitant, so he tells John to repeat the commandments, and John repeats all of them except for adultery, which is interesting because he committed adultery, so you should know that it's a sin. So if you don't know the commandments, I'll see if I can put like a picture up on the screen for you guys if you would like to have a look at that. But if it's not there, I either forgot or I couldn't do it, so then I'm sorry. Okay, so then John tells Hale about Abigail, and he doesn't believe it, and he says, you'll testify it in court. And John says if he must, he will. And then he asks them if they believe in witches, and both John and Elizabeth are kind of saying not really, especially Elizabeth. She says if a witch is a good Christian woman such as herself who is now being accused, then no, she does not believe in witches. And so he says to her, do you question the gospel? And Elizabeth obviously takes offense, and she says, question Abigail about the gospel, because Elizabeth has done nothing wrong, and she doesn't want to believe in witches if she must believe that she's a witch, because she knows in her heart that she's a good woman. And so you can see this whole thing is very illogical, and it's just like it's getting out of hand. So then Hale says to them, go baptize the third child, go to church, and basically they need to start keeping a low profile. And then Giles Corey enters. Okay, so Giles Corey enters. They say they took his wife. So there we go. Took his wife. And then Francis Nurse enters. And they took his Rebecca. Okay, so they say, what could they possibly have taken Rebecca for? And she was charged with murder. So they say, what did she murder? That's impossible. And she was charged with the murder of Anne Putnam's babies. So if you remember in Act 1, Anne Putnam is the one who had 8 children and 7 died. And now she blames Rebecca for murdering her babies, which I think is out of jealousy, because we know Rebecca had a lot of children and a lot of grandchildren, and we know that they might have also done it because Anne Putnam's husband obviously had issues with his land and arguments with Francis Nurse. So again, it's just out of self-gain over here. Okay. Then they kind of say to Hale, how can this happen? This is so, it's just impossible. And then Mr. Hale says, man, remember, until an hour before the devil fell, God thought him beautiful in heaven. Okay, so he's saying that, Elizabeth might be a good woman, but remember, the devil was also good to God, and then he became the devil. So it's kind of it's pathetic is what it is. So then they ask how Giles Corey's wife got arrested, and then he tells the story of how she sold this man a pig, and a few weeks later his pig died, and Martha, so that's Giles Corey's wife, said to him, well, if you don't know how to feed your pigs, you'll never be able to keep one alive. And then so then that guy went to court and he accused Martha of bewitching his pigs because he has not been able to keep a pig alive. And he says that when she reads her books, she must be bewitching him. So there you see that Giles Corey was so stupid to admit in public that his wife reads books, because it obviously came back to bite everybody in the bum. So then Ezekiel enters. So we know that is an official of the court, and it can only be bad news if he's here, because they told Proctor's family that Ezekiel was the one who took their wives to jail. So Ezekiel enters, and Marshall. Okay. So Ezekiel's actually afraid of Proctor, but he stands firm, and he says that he has a warrant for Elizabeth. And they kind of ask, okay, if you've got a warrant, who charged her? And it comes out that Abigail charged her, so surprise, surprise. And then they ask her, does Elizabeth have any dolls? So now this is where the puppet comes in. So Elizabeth says, no, she hasn't had any dolls since children. And then Ezekiel says, well, I spy a puppet over there. And then Elizabeth goes, oh, that puppet. It's Mary's puppet. She gave it to me today. Call Mary. So they go get Mary. And then Ezekiel's inspecting the puppet, and he finds a needle in the stomach of the puppet. Okay, so a puppet is a doll. So he finds a needle in the doll. And then he says, this is witchcraft, because Abigail got stabbed with a needle that night at Paris's house in her stomach. So obviously, you and I would look at this and go, well, obviously Abigail stabbed herself with a needle in the stomach, right? But now for them, this is hard evidence that it must have been Elizabeth. So then Mary admits it's hers, and she's admitting, okay, yes, this doll is mine. And they say to her, are you sure a spirit is not influencing you right now? And Mary says no. And so out of anger, John Proctor rips the warrant, and then he calls Hale a broken minister, because Hale looks at this doll and believes that Elizabeth must now be a witch. And then, okay, so they've already arrested her and everything like that. So that kind of plays out from there a little bit more. So obviously, like I said, you must read the book. But what's interesting is Mary made the doll next to Abigail. So obviously she says that. And you can only imagine that Abigail saw her do it and thought, this is the perfect opportunity, because Mary's going to go home and give this to Elizabeth. And then I'm going to stab myself with a needle and make it seem like witchcraft. So they take Elizabeth away, and then John Proctor tells Mr. Hale that he is a broken minister and that vengeance is walking Salem, which is obviously true, right? Because it's obviously true, because it's all like fake. There's no like real evidence here. It's just like seeking vengeance. So then he says, Pontius Pilate. Okay, so why this is interesting is because this is the guy who ordered that Jesus be crucified. And this is significant because basically what's happening is bad people are ordering that innocent people be crucified, just like Jesus. So you can look at it that way, which is why it's significant that they say that. So yeah, they take Elizabeth away, and then it's just John Proctor and Mary left over, and he says to Mary, you need to go to court and tell them that Abigail did this by herself, and that you made the doll, and that Abigail saw you make the doll, which is why she stabbed herself with a needle. So Mary says she can't do it. So Mary is weak, right? And she's afraid of Abigail. And a lot of these girls are afraid of Abigail, which is why they just let Abigail do whatever she wants without saying anything against her, because now they're afraid what's Abigail going to do to them. So Abigail says, so Mary says that Abigail will charge lechery on Proctor. So lechery is adultery. And Proctor says, you know about it. And then she says, yes, Abigail told us. And then John Proctor says towards the end of the act, peace, it is a providence and no great change. we are only what we always were, but naked now. So basically, what he's saying is peace is obviously short-lived. Nothing has changed. They are all the same people that they've always been, except they're naked now. And what he means is that their intentions, true intentions, have been realized, right? So basically, what he's saying is that we're naked now, is that the truth has come out about our real intentions for one another. We are not peaceful people, and we are here for self gain. And now this is out in the open, it's become obvious. Okay, so that was Act 2. I'll do Act 3 soon, and you can kind of see this is where things start to play out. So there's actually only 2 acts left. This is actually a 4-act play. So there will be 2 more videos, and it should help you a little bit, just understanding a little bit of significance here and there. So I hope it helped you. If it did, share it, like it. It helps me to know like if this is worth my time or not. And if it is, I might even do question papers with you guys if you guys would like that. So just let me know.